Hello and welcome to another edition of Straight from the Training Ground, the podcast where we share our love for the beautiful game and the people out in their communities doing beautiful things. Very excited to have Coach Luca here with us in this edition. Coach Luca is from Street Soccer USA in Los Angeles. Luca, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Luca, you and I met recently, and I find what you do really interesting. I think more people need to hear about it. But before we get into that, why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about your background in soccer in general? When did
Mm.
you first, see the game of soccer or fall in love with it, start playing, whatever?
Yeah, totally. I'm from New York City originally, and my father is a Hungarian immigrant. He came over from Hungary via Austria, and he was a semi-professional player in Europe as a young man. And growing up in New York City, it's a very international city, as I'm sure most listeners know,
Mhm.
and it was popular. And I was just, of my brothers, of which I have several. I kind of took to it the most, and that kind of became my like bonding thing with my pop. Like he and I, our thing is always kind of tennis and soccer and sport, and like in this work as well. But yeah, that's really what got me into it, and then it just never went away.
Yeah.
It started as a sport. It turned into like a kind of identity, which is also like we talk a lot about it in terms of trauma and things like that. How like we don't want to get our identity too tied to like a passing thing. We see it with like professional athletes when they retire. It's like, oh, who am I now that I'm not
Mm.
this professional athlete? So I've always been very aware of that, but it was for a long time my identity. And then it turned more recently into like a community and cultural thing. Like I look at soccer as the kind of invisible thread that kind of connects me through to the people in my life that I do my work with.
Very cool. So, along those lines, when did you first get involved with Street Soccer USA? How did you hear about them?
You know what happened? I played soccer in college, and then I was out in the University of Colorado playing club. I had left it. I kind of became disillusioned at the American university style of playing. I also wanted to party, which I'm now in recovery for several years from partying because that was what I chose to do instead. But I came back to New York with a degree in history and no job. And I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. And so I was like, what am I gonna do here? And my pop was like, well, you can't stay here. Go go get a job. And he had actually told me, hey, like they're hiring at this soccer coach spot. And and I thought that I was gonna go in and coach like high schoolers, like varsity style soccer. And I was like, this might be a good part-time gig for me to just like kind of get my father off my back and do whatever. I was 22 or something. And I walk in and I go to like what's essentially an on the pitch interview, and it's 2 year olds. Like, and I was thinking, did I show up to the wrong place? Like, what's going on here? And it turned out that not only was it like not what I had imagined, I ended up being quite good at it, mostly because the younger the ages, the more my voice was kind of comforting to them. I had this deep kind of reverberation in my voice that was soothing for like adults. It was like horrific to hear, but like the young kids were like really drawn to it, and it was a calming thing. And I thought, you know what, like I'm good at this, and that's enough reason for me to stick around for now. So I stuck there. I kind of moved through the ranks of this what I like to call bougie baby soccer organization, and I was getting paid decently, and I was getting good hours, and I was learning a new skill set, which was essentially like not necessarily coaching, but it was more like the art of entertainment within coaching.
Yeah.
I remember there were a lot of actors at this job, and they knew nothing about ball. And I said, what are you even doing here? And they said, listen, I don't know anything about soccer, but like I can act like I know something about it. And I've learned more from coaching from those guys and gals than I've really learned from most traditional coaches. And one day I got requested to do a special needs group. It was an autism based group. And I remember thinking, I'm not qualified for this, and we are not qualified for this. And the group loved it. they didn't seem to care that I was qualified or not, but I cared. And I just thought, I went back to the CEO, and I was a crazy, 22-year-old. I thought that my opinion was the one that mattered. It doesn't to this day. Like, I know it's just like I'm just another person. But at the time, I had this kind of swelled ego, which at the time actually worked out, because I went to this guy and I said, "Hey, we should cut this special needs program, because it's kind of doing a disservice to this community that's looking to us for support, and we're not prepared for that." And this guy says to me, "Do you want to do it? Do you want to run it?" And I thought, "What? No, that's not what I'm saying. I wanted to just like criticize you and like take no responsibility myself, because that was kind of my jam." And I eventually thought on it, and I ended up taking over this program. But I told them, like, I need to go back to school if you guys are gonna want me to do this. And so, along with them, and my parents were both Columbia grad students where they met, and I grew up around that area. So I went and I did my master's in special education and childhood development, so that I could be, and I kind of worked this director job while I was going to school at nights, so that I could kind of literally be learning on the fly, so that I could go and build out this curriculum and like do these sessions myself, and then train other coaches to do them. And it kind of grew from autism to all different types of different disorders, whether it was social and emotional disorders. I had a really cool program with a blind school in the Bronx, which was kind of nuts, but it was very cool. And, I ended up hitting a rough spot in my life. And in 2018, I just said, you know what, like, I'm going to buy a car and I'm going to drive to California, and like, let's see what happens. And everybody's like, "You're crazy. You're trying to like change your life around and like get better wellness, try to stop drinking, this and that, and you're going to go to LA?" And I thought, I know how it sounds, but yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And I did. I got a lot of help along the way. I did very little. There was a lot of support around me. And amongst that support, I was still working for this organization that I was doing the special needs stuff with. And when I was driving across the country, I was under the impression that I would be able to start the special needs program in LA, because they had a chapter here.
Okay.
And they sold to a group of venture capitalists, which was like on my drive. So I found out driving through Ohio. I remember it very well. I was driving through Ohio, and I got a call from the California director saying, "Hey, you remember like our talk? Like, that position doesn't exist anymore, because these venture capitalists, they're not super interested in funding this like essentially no profit endeavor."
Yeah.
And I ended up working as their business development person. I was coaching. I was kind of hodgepodging around, and I got a call from the street soccer team in New York. An old buddy of mine, Duke, Coach Charlie, out in New York, one of the Caribbean crew out there, and he was the director of street soccer in New York at the time. And they were essentially looking to start this thing up in LA. There was a small program that was just doing after school programs, and they needed somebody to kind of inject some life into it and actually create a community club and like a real nonprofit model. And it was one of those things where I was like thinking, like, what am I going to do here with my career? Mm-hmm. And like the phone rang, and it was him. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. That's just it.
Oh, it's very cool, man. It's crazy how that works out, isn't it?
It is.
So I know off camera, and you and I talked before another time. You tell everybody a little bit. I think it's very unique, and I'm sure you have lots of stories we don't have time to get into today. But tell everyone a little bit about what you do, what your daily role is with Street Soccer USA, what kind of things, hurdles, and challenges you come across in what you do out there in LA.
Yeah, that is a big question. So I'm the director of Street Soccer Los Angeles, and we're in year 7, I believe. I'm in year 6. I just entered year 6. I celebrated 5 years back in just January now. And I wear a lot of hats. That director role kind of encompasses development on the fundraising scale is the most important. curriculum, hiring, community outreach. I kind of, like accounting, I kind of have to do it all. I was lucky enough to be able to identify an old colleague and friend of mine who's also from Ohio, actually from Oberlin. And I met him in New York doing that other job. He had to come out here to take care of his father. And it was a huge relief because he now helps me out and does a lot of that. But the day-to-day is that we run programs, free to play, high quality instruction around soccer, really around futsal, in the housing projects in South LA, particularly in Watts. And Watts LA is an historic kind of community and space. It's home of the Watts riots, home of the Watts Towers. Tons of celebrity and kind of pop and entertainment culture has come out of. I mean, anybody who's from the States knows South Central. It's like from NWA to Friday to all the Boys in the Hood. Like, this is a very kind of culturally rich space. And with that has come, a lot of community violence and gangs, and like we're very close to the border, so there's a lot of Central and South American migrants that come up through the San Diego border there, and it creates tension between the other populations that already live there because there's a lack of resources. So by creating these clubs, the hope is that it's kind of threefold, that we provide a baseline access to a sport that the rest of the world gets to play, and that we don't, because we priced out our entire kind of middle and lower class, whatever is left of the middle class, which I don't think is any, and our entire kind of lower class of the United States is completely locked out of this $3,000 to $5,000 a year pay to play structure. And that's the number one. Like, I can get more like holistic and philosophical about it all, which I love to do. But the most important thing is just that simple. We provide high level instruction in a place that it's usually not, historically has not been there. The second thing that we do through this work is a little more philosophical, which is along the lines of community violence mitigation. Like I'll use Watts as the example because it's where we're kind of most intimately involved, although we are across all of LA and South LA. There are 4 housing development projects, and they beef with each other. They are along gang lines, and they are 3/4 of a mile from one to the other, to the other, to the other. A combination of infrastructure. So like kids can't walk down the streets here in LA the way that they can in New York, for example. A 3/4 of a mile walk might get you hit by a 70-mile-per-hour car. So that's an immediate restriction that we have. The other thing is that you can't just walk into another project if you're from a rivaling project. Like these are realities, but they're even more strongly so because this is not the same world that we're living in as like the mid-90s, for example. The gang warfare isn't quite the same as it used to be. It's still around, but it's not as kind of detrimental and as in your face. But the folklore definitely is still there. So all these kids, aunties, uncles, moms, dads, grandmas, grandpas say, don't go over there or else X, Y, and Z is going to happen. So we have this schism between these 4 very closely, like geographically located spaces. Sometimes these kids are literally related. Often they are literally related and they don't see each other, but they end up going to the same middle school often and then the same high school. And we're seeing gang activity at like 11, 12 years old, really 12 years old. And that's when these kids get to the school, they see kid across the way, and instead of saying, oh, look, there's little Johnny who I played soccer with growing up, it's like, oh no, like there's that kid from this project from Nickerson Gardens, and like I'm gonna go like mess him up. What we hope to do is by providing kind of exposure through the game on a very kind of micro community level, is to kind of mitigate that otherness and to kind of soften it and alleviate it a little bit so that we can hopefully use this game for broader social change. And the third thing, which is kind of my most personal and selfish endeavor in this, is that I have a kind of deep resentment towards U.S. soccer, which I think anybody who's got a brain does. Like there's this roteness and this kind of like robotic nature to the way that Americans operate kind of in general, but they don't do it as well as the Germans. So it's not like we can kind of do that. And we have this very kind of overprotective parental view of the game. So, and that comes with money. You pay $5,000 a year, parents start to feel entitled to their say.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm chalking up a big chunk of change. You better listen to me, or else I'm going to take my money and go. That is as detrimental as it gets to the development of individual players, but also to the culture around it. And that culture, without that kind of heavy intervention and interference from parents, from adults, coaches, even, one of the biggest things that I see in the U.S. as an issue is overcoaching. We
Mhm.
don't let these kids fall on their ass, excuse my language, and get back up. You know, what sports we see that in is like basketball. We really see it because this game is being played in the same neighborhoods that we're operating in the same kind of environments that lack this immediate kind of oversight and overview, right? And so we see that kind of improvisational nature, that jazz that's kind of played in Rio and in Amsterdam and in Paris, in like the cages, you know, where we see the Neymars and the Zidanes and the, you know, and the Cruyffs of the world. They come out, and the Ronaldinho's, my personal hero. They come out of these environments that force them to improvise, and you see it in their hips. That's why they're called the Samba Kings and Queens, you know,
Yeah.
because they dance when they play, and you can feel that. You can feel the music. I feel like I'm doing math when I'm watching the U.S. soccer, you know, and there's a big difference there. And what our hope here for that third prong of it is that we ingrain this culture that we have with basketball into futsal and soccer, so that we make it accessible, but we also make it kind of sexier and cooler. And like with that, subsequently, we will get better. It'll be more in our bones. And our African American and Latino populations, and usually I'll say Black instead of African American, because in New York, where I grew up, a lot of the Black populations were, as we were talking before, were Caribbean, you know, Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, Dominican. You call a Dominican guy African American, I mean, you call him Black. They're not often. There's a lot of colorism. There's a lot of racism within these countries. So here in LA, we really deal with a lot of real like African American diaspora. Like they came from the Southeast during the Great Migration, and those are different populations of people. But I'm convinced that, you know, a 50% Latino population in LA, plus a newly tapped Black population that's playing in South LA, that's what's going to change our game along the kind of structures that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And
And
I
I want
agree.
to mention, I'm sorry, I want to mention one more thing. I really want to specify that it's not about race, that these races happen to just be living in the socioeconomic environments that allow for that kind of improvisation and that kind of freedom to learn. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
so it's more of a correlation than a causation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, again, I mean, I can't thank you enough. I think what you do out there is tremendous. And, you know, the world needs more people like you doing those things in some of those neighborhoods and providing soccer to the kids like that. Just real quick, another minute or two here. Where would you like to see your chapter there in LA of Street Soccer USA? Where would you like to see that a few years from now, as it progresses in a perfect world?
Yeah, a perfect world, huh? In a perfect world, the government funds all of this stuff, and like money is not ever an issue. Because you ask what our barriers are here. Barriers are always money. You know,
Yeah,
we need money to fund these things. But and you also phrase that in a way that is helpful to me, because a few years is an important kind of marker, right? A few means three, and 3 years. Let me put this into a little bit of perspective. So I just mentioned that I celebrated my 5-year anniversary doing this thing. It's feeling after 5 years like we have just hardly started.
yeah,
I am a big believer that these types of projects, they are not years, they are not months, they are not weeks, they are potentially not even a decade. These are generational things. They need
yeah.
to really be, you've got to spend a decade building that foundation so that you can kind of see it out. So in 3-5 years, I'm hoping that we are in another 2 major neighborhoods. So like I'm hoping to expand into Compton, and I'm hoping to expand into the Inland Empire a little bit, which is kind of due east of Los Angeles, where most people who've been priced out of metropolitan Los Angeles have moved out to. But if you ask me where I hope we are in 20 years, in 15 years, I hope that there's a street soccer community club, free to play club in every single housing development project in LA. And I hope that every single one of those projects are connected through street soccer, through weekend street league events, through shopping events, through our sponsors, just in any way that we can continue to expose our youth to each other through this game at a kind of grander scale. That would be the perfect world. 20 years down the line, a community club for every single public housing spot in LA. That's it. And me not being the face, because I'm telling you, like, as much as I love this job, the best day of my career is when this face is no longer on the podcast. This face is no longer doing the face forward stuff, because this work has to be community driven. It has to be stakeholder autonomy. Like I mentioned, from New York, I don't represent California. I don't represent Los Angeles. And I definitely don't represent these kind of nuanced experiences of Black and brown children that are growing up in these projects. So in those 20 years, when we have these clubs in every single project in LA, I'm hoping that they are run and they are funded so that the people running them are from the communities and they are paid living wages. And not just that, they can pay their coaching staffs, who are going to also be from those communities. They can pay them living wages. And again, where does that come back to?
Yeah.
Money.
Yeah, absolutely. But I like the way you think, and that's a great goal to have. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that would be a great situation if we could ever get to that point, not just in LA, but all across the country. So
I think that's Coach, our goal, 26 and 26.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So
we're aiming, just to clarify there, we're aiming to build 26 pitches across the United States by 2026. And by pitches, we mean small-sided futsal courts, so that we can replicate this model that is successful across the world here in the States.
So if you're not familiar with Street Soccer USA, check them out on their online, their website. They do a lot of great things. And here, straight from the training ground, we're partners with them and big fans as well of everything that they do. Coach Luca, keep up the great work, man. It's great hearing from you, and keep working with all those kids out there. It's a thankless job, as we all know, but you make a difference every day, and we need more people like you. So thanks for taking the time to stop by, and keep up the great work, man.
My brother Jason, thank you so much for having me.
Visit our partners at Uno Zero, where they make classic leather football boots. Check out our friends at Duke Brand FC for all of your coaching needs, notebooks, and more. Visit our friends at TractionSocks.com for your grip socks.